Om Ajnanam Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chaksururmilidam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Vasudevasutam Devam Kansachanuramardanam Devaki Param Anandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Good evening and welcome back to our continuing series on discussions regarding the Bhagavad Gita. Today's session is going to be very interesting. We're going to talk about nature. We're going to talk about the enjoyer and consciousness. This is primarily a starting point on the last 6 chapters, which talks about how jnana and how jnana leads to bhakti, talks about jnana and how it leads to bhakti. So what are we going to talk about today is basically some basic concepts which Lord Krishna informed Arjuna to help his understanding about what he needs to do to attain moksha. What he's going to talk about is issues relating to material nature. What is material nature? How is it affecting the living entity? What is its impact in terms of how it affects the spiritual growth of an individual? Then Lord Krishna talks about the field of activity, what we do, our body, how it acts, what is involved in this field of activity that is engaging us day in and day out. Then he makes a very nice, interesting point about the knower of the field of activity. So there's a distinction between the field of activity, the body, which is comprising material nature, and the knower, who knows what is going on. Lord Krishna then talks about what is the object of knowledge? What is the end result? What is that needs to be known? And more importantly, how is that knowledge to be acquired? So object of knowledge is what one needs to know. Knowledge here is how that knowledge is attained. And then there is this lovely description about who is the enjoyer of the entire universe, of the material energy and things like that. So these are key terms, these key concepts that are important for an understanding of how knowledge is used to attain bhakti. And this was prompted at the very first 2 verses when Arjuna told or asked Krishna. He asked Krishna, what is Prakritim? What is Purusha, the enjoyer? Then he asked him, what is Kshetram, the field? Kshetram Yam, the knower of the field. Jnanam, knowledge, and Jnayam, object of knowledge. So these are questions Arjuna asked Lord Krishna. And Lord Krishna then went on to explain that Kshetra is the body. It is the field of activity for the conditioned souls in the material body. It's a product of material nature. So basically the Kshetra or the field refers to the body which is material, mutable, transitory, and perishable. That means whatever we do, whatever activities we undertake based on the body, that body is of these characteristics. But there is another important thing to distinguish from the body. That is the Kshetra Yam, the soul, that is the knower of the body. So there is a body and there is a knower of the body, which is the individual soul or jiva living within that body. And it is important to understand that he is different from the body and is its proprietor. Kshetra Gyan refers to the conscious knower of the body who is of the same essence as knowledge. This knower, this soul is immutable, eternal, and imperishable. The soul is really residing in the body. So in this regard, it is important to differentiate between Kshetra, which is Prakriti or matter, which is insentient, and the knower of the Kshetra is the Purusha, who is sentient. So it's very important at the beginning to differentiate between the body and the knower of the body. And there is another important knower, and that is Krishna. And Krishna tells Arjuna, I am the knower of the field, and I am in all bodies as the super soul. Kshetragayam kapi ma'am viddhi sarva kshetrasu bharata. Kshetragaya means the knower or proprietor of the body. The individual soul is the proprietor of the individual body. But the super soul, the personality of Godhead Krishna, is the proprietor of all bodies everywhere. That has to be clearly understood. So basically, there is a Kshetra, the field of activity, and there are two knowers. The individual knower or the soul, and the Lord, who is the super soul. There is another concept which is very important to understand with regard to this topic, and that is Pradhana Kshetragya. Pradhana means subtle matter, such as ether. It means material elements that are not manifest, and Prakriti means when they are manifest. So Prakriti is matter that is manifest, but what creates this Prakriti? Something that is the potential to manifest is Pradhana. Now, it's important to understand the body consists of senses, and Krishna is Ritikesha, the controller of the senses of all bodies. Out of the two knowers of the bodies, the super soul is the chief knower of everyone's body. He is infallible, and the individual soul is fallible and subordinate. In the scriptures, it is stated that Purusha means the spiritual spark, living entities who are entangled in that subtle material existence. This does not mean that the individual soul and the super soul are one. They are one in quality as the spirit soul, but the individual soul and super soul are different. So this is the starting of this chapter, which sets out the context or the framework to differentiate matter and spirit. Matter is Prakriti, and spirit is the spirit soul, which is the individual, as well as the super soul, which is the Lord. Now that we are clear about the distinction between the two, then Lord Krishna goes on to explain what is Jnanam. Jnanam is perfect knowledge. It is perfect knowledge of material body and its knowers, the soul and super soul. Jnanam is real knowledge, means understanding the separate existence of the Lord, Jiva, and Prakriti, though they are mixed together. This is real knowledge. We must distinguish between real knowledge, that is knowledge of the existence of the Lord, Jiva, and Prakriti, and knowledge of the material world, which we are all so accustomed to accumulating. So that is Jnanam. When we talk of Kshetra and Kshetra Nyam, the topics that are interesting that we will be covering are the composition of the body. What is the body composed of? And once we understand the composition of the body, the material body, then we need to know what are the qualities of the body that we assume to be ours. What does it actually characterize? And the other area that is covered is changes that the body undergoes in its lifetime. The other important topic is origin of the body. Where did the body come from? Where did this material Prakriti energy originate? And how is it the identity of the knower of a body can be established? Who is this knower of body? Who is inside this body? And finally, the powers of the knower of the body. So you see, the last two refers to the knower of the body, which is the individual soul and the super soul, whereas the first four topics refer to the material body, prakriti, the composition, qualities, changes, and origin. So when we want to understand this better, we can refer to this verse 13.6, where Lord Krishna explains what is the composition of the body in terms of Mahabhutani, the great elements, Ahamkaraha, false ego, Buddhi, intelligence, Avyaktam, the unmanifested, Indriyani, senses, Desa Ekam, 11, Pancha, Cha, Indriya, Gocharo. So it is important to understand that the body is composed of 5 great elements, 5 knowledge acquiring senses, 5 working senses, 5 sense objects, mind, intelligence, ego, and pradhana. Pradhana is the unmanifestation of the elements that we refer to. So this diagram explains very clearly this 24 elements that compose the body. Prakriti is basically material nature, and that is the basis of Mahat. Mahat is the undifferentiated form of total material energy, or pradhana, as I mentioned just now. It is unmanifested. It is within us. It is there. And that is controlling the ahankara, which is the false ego. Then we have to understand that the false ego oversees the 5 sense objects: form, taste, smell, touch, sound. And it is controlled by the 5 working senses, or karma indriya, and 5 knowledge acquiring senses, jnana indriya. Then we have the 5 great elements, which are also matter, material energy, fire, word, water, earth, air, and ether. And you can see how the sense objects relate to that particular great elements, and how the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin are all part of the knowledge acquiring senses, whereas speech, hands, feet, anus, genitals are the 5 working senses. So this is the table of the 24 elements that indicate the composition of the body. So next we talk about the qualities of changes of the body. These are the qualities of changes: desire, hatred, happiness, distress, aggregate of the body evolving from 24 elements, life symptoms, conviction. And these were indicated here. Icha, dvesha, sukham, dukham, sangasta, chetana, driti, eta, shetram, samsasena, savikaram, udhartam. Now, what this means is the body changes. It shifts from desire to hatred, happiness to distress. And this aggregation of the 4 elements, they actually evolve, they shift from one to the other, leading to different life symptoms that we indicate, including the degree of conviction. The aggregate of all this, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, life symptoms, conviction, all this together is the field of activity. It's the emotional state, the psychological state, the physical state one is. And all this are actually part of the prakriti, or matter. So the body actually undergoes 6 changes, vikaram. And this is the birth and growth, maintenance, maturity, decline, and death. And all these have to be undergone. And every stage really is very, very painful, very, very troublesome. Because it is stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the world of the unborn, the child's stay in the womb of the mother, its suffering, etc., are all very graphically described. It should be understood thoroughly that birth is distressful, because we forget how much distress we have suffered within the womb of the mother. We do not make any solution to repetition of birth and death. This is the purport on 13.8 to 12, written by Srila Prabhupada. So this is something that we have to be very careful about. So, in short, we just talked about the composition of the body and the changes in the body. So, what is jnanam? What is this process of acquiring knowledge? When we are talking of knowledge, we are talking about what we need to know. But knowledge also can mean how are we going to get that knowledge? So in the Bhagavad Gita, there is a clear distinction between how we're going to get the knowledge, the process of acquiring knowledge, and what knowledge we should acquire. That is the object of knowledge. So let's first talk about jnanam, the process of acquiring knowledge. Krishna describes different aspects of saintly character by which the soul, the kshetragam, can disentangle himself from the material body, kshetra, and attain liberation. So we started the discussion by saying there's a difference between kshetra, the field of activity primarily within the material realm, and kshetragam, the knower or proprietor of the body, which is now entangled within this body. How is this knower of the body going to disentangle himself from the material body? This requires certain saintly characters. This requires a process of acquiring knowledge. So let's understand what is that is involved in acquiring knowledge. What are those saintly characters somebody must have? From the Bhagavad Gita, it's stated that humility, pridelessness, no false ego, serving a bona fide guru. These are four very important qualities that is needed to even begin the process of absorbing Krishna, knowledge about Krishna, and beginning the process of disentanglement. Because when there's humility, there's a realization of how much we lack. There is a need and desire to learn, and the mind is opened up when one is not proud or arrogant, when there's no false ego about who we are. And through service of a bona fide guru, gradually that knowledge is revealed. Apart from these four very initial, very important characteristics, there are more characteristics of saintly character that is required to acquire knowledge. They include simplicity, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control. So when there is a sense of simplicity in life, when we are clean in the body, in the mind, in the emotional state, but there is this dhriti, this steadiness, this focus, self-control to maintain simplicity, cleanliness, to maintain that humility, to maintain that service attitude, then this facilitates the continual acquisition of knowledge. And of course, as this goes on, the process requires attempts to be and remain even-minded amid pleasure and pain, to tolerate this duality which distracts the mind from the targeted purpose of acquiring knowledge, the need to be tolerant of pain and suffering, remaining non-violent in the thought and action, being steady, detachment from material pursuits and results of action, being free from being entangled by material pleasures and secluded living. These are requirements of saintly character to acquire knowledge on how to disentangle from the clutches of Maya and Prakriti. There must also be, after a lot of reading, analysis, association with saintly characters, a development of a perception of the miseries of birth, death, old age, and disease. But this has to come about because only when the perception manifests in the heart and realization comes about. The objects of sense gratification, which entangles one in this miseries of birth, death, old age, and disease, can take place. And this requires very constant and unalloyed devotion to Lord Krishna, detachment from general mass of people who inadvertently, knowingly or unknowingly, attract our attention and propose that we continue sense gratification. It is also required that one accepts the importance of self-realization and a philosophical search for absolute truth. So these are a long list of things that we have to aspire to do, starting from humility, serving a bona fide guru, being humble, removing ego, detachments, all these things that Lord Krishna advised Arjuna in chapter 2 and chapter 3, if you recall. We talked about how to do work and not be attracted to the results, how to serve the guru, how to make sure that you acquire knowledge from the right people, how to maintain a fixed mind, how to strengthen intelligence. Everything that we have heard and listened to in chapter 3, 4, 5, 6, now it comes in fruition. And this is all relevant in the context of acquiring the knowledge of the super soul, of the soul, and of material nature. Now, this process gradually shifts somebody. It terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. My charanya yogena bhaktir avyartabacharni. So, what it's saying is, as we gradually disentangle ourselves by acquisition of knowledge, by adopting these saintly characters, over time, the devotional service to the Lord increases. We begin to have that love in the heart beginning to manifest. But how can we love someone if we don't know who that person is? We cannot love without knowing who to love. So what is that object? Who is Krishna? Who is that which we should love? This is very lovely, very nicely described in the next section when Lord Krishna talks about the object of knowledge. Name is the object. What is the object of knowledge? So we talked about the process of acquiring knowledge. These are the saintly characters we need. But ultimately, how do you describe the Lord? Who is he? And the next few verses gives a very interesting glimpse, which we may not be able to grapple, but this is what's written. It says, everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, heads, and faces. And he has ears everywhere. In this way, the super soul exists, pervading everything. This is the description of the super soul, not the individual soul. It's just like comparing to the sun diffusing its unlimited rays. He exists in his all-pervading form. In him exists all individual beings, beginning from Brahma down to the smallest ants. Although he is engaged in his pastimes, in his transcendental planet, he is all-pervading. Individual souls cannot claim to be all-pervading. It is foolishness to think that by attaining knowledge, he can come to that stage. So that is very important to understand, that very extensive, which is beyond our ability to perceive. How can anybody have hands and legs everywhere, seeing everything, faces, eyes and ears everywhere, which tells us how pervasive the Lord is, despite being in his own transcendental abode. He is with us, although he is not with us. So this is a beautiful description of the Lord. And the next verse goes on further. it goes in a little bit deeper and says that the super soul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time, he is the master of all the modes of material nature. Some points to note here: the Supreme Lord, although the source of senses, does not have senses. The spiritual senses of the individual soul is covered by the material elements. That is why detachment from material elements gradually allows the spiritual senses to be revived through bhakti. Supreme Lord senses are transcendental and uncontaminated and is therefore called nirguna. Nirguna means beyond the gunas. The Supreme Lord has no hands that are materially contaminated, but he has hands and accepts whatever sacrifice is offered to him. The Lord appears by his eternal potency in his eternal form called Satchit Ananda Vigraha. He is full of opulence, proprietor of all wealth and owner of all energy, most intelligent, full of knowledge, maintainer of all living entities and witness of all activities. Those who are materially affected cannot understand the personality of Godhead. So these are some very important points that helps us understand the essence of this particular text. And this is a nice diagram that sort of summarizes very nicely how the super soul is the original source of all senses. Without senses, unattached, is the maintainer of all beings, transcends the modes of nature, same time he's the master of all the modes of material nature. So this picture very nicely represents that point. The other verse which is worth looking into is this beautiful statement that states the supreme truth exists outside and inside of all living beings, the moving and the non-moving. Because he is subtle, he is beyond the power of material senses to see or to know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. So what this means is he is present in both the spiritual and material worlds. By sitting, he moves far. By lying down, he goes everywhere. One cannot see or understand with material senses how he's enjoying his opulence. Now, the last part, although far, far away, he's also near to all. What that means is, it depends on how we want to get close to him. We sit down, meditate, pray, he's near. When we do not meditate, we do not pray, we do not think of him, he's very far away. So how far he is from us depends on how near we want to get to him. So he's both far, if we are not interested, it's very near. The minute we think of him and we meditate on his beautiful form, Shama Sundara form. The next verse indicates that although the super soul appears to be divided among all beings, he is never divided. He is situated as one. Although he is the maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he does and develops all. So the key points here are the Lord is in everyone's heart as the super soul. That does not mean he is divided as he is one. Compared to the sun, he appears in many places to many persons at the same time. He develops all from their original state at the time of creation and divorce in the form of time during annihilation. So people, the living entities come from him and the living entities will be destroyed by him. After creation, everything rests in his omnipresence. After annihilation, everything again returns to rest in him. So this is a beautiful description of the Lord, which he has given us. And this is the object of knowledge. You can see this lovely picture that describes this very nicely. Although the super soul appears to be divided among all beings, he is never divided. He is situated as one. Although he is the maintainer of every living entity, it is understood that he devours and develops all. This picture again I selected because it's a very lovely description of this wonderful verse. Further description, he is the source of light in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the source of light in all luminous objects like the sun, the moon, the stars. In the spiritual kingdom, there is no need for the sun or moon as the effulgence of the Supreme illuminates everything. In the material world, that Brahma Jyoti is covered by the Mahatattva or material elements. He's just like the sun, eternally luminous, but he's far, far beyond the darkness of the material world. Brahman is the concentrated transcendental knowledge. Only by knowing him, one can surpass the boundary of birth and death. So these few verses, very intriguing in the sense that it describes the power, potency, omnipresence of the Lord in sufficient detail for us to be in awe of his magnificence. And Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, thus the field of activities, the body, the knowledge, and the knowable have been summarily described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature. So who is Lord Krishna's devotees? Those who engage in bhakti, those who surrender to him, those who give up their intrinsic nature and try to adopt the saintly character to gradually acquire knowledge about him. So there is this process of acquiring knowledge by developing that saintly character, virtues which we describe, and then the essence and the object of knowledge that is describing becomes more and more manifested in the hearts of devotees. Then the second part is talking about Prakriti, Purusha, and their union. Material nature, Prakriti, and the Jivas or the living entities, Purushas, are beginningless or eternal, Anadi, being the energies of the Supreme Lord. Their transformation and material modes are the products of material nature. So what is Prakriti? What are the characteristics of Prakriti? It's very interesting. Just yesterday, I was listening to a talk and I picked up this very interesting, nice way of describing Prakriti. And this person who is a devotee of Lord Krishna described Prakriti in 4 main characteristics. First, he says Prakriti is characterized as Dukkhalam, the world of misery. Dukh is misery. Alam is the place of misery, world of misery. Wherever there is Prakriti, there is misery. Lord Ram had to go through a lot of misery when Sita was taken away from him. All of us go through misery in every aspect of our life. So that is one characteristic of misery. And this misery is eternal. It is eternally existent. As long as there's Prakriti, there is misery, and this is eternal. And this eternal misery has different elements that we talked about, elements of nature. We talked about the gross elements, the subtle elements, ego, intelligence, mind, remember? All these are the elements. And these elements are all considered to be misery because they are controlled by the modes of material nature. That is goodness, sattvic, passion, rajasic, and ignorance. So a very interesting way to bring everything together to understand the concept is to look at what has been described as the tree of material nature. The Lord and living entities are compared to 2 birds sitting in a tree. While the Elysian living entity eats the fruits of material world, the Lord, as the super soul and best friend, witnesses these activities. This is in the Mundaka Upanishads. And these fruits, there are 2 types of fruits: enjoyment of happiness and suffering of distress. And these fruits on this tree are being nourished by three types of roots: sattvic, goodness; rajasic, passion; and tamasic, ignorance. So this tree of material nature is a very lovely depiction of how the tree is not the same as the birds, but the birds are attracted to the tree, and the bird that is putting the back against the Lord and focusing on those fruits, the enjoyment of happiness, suffering of distress, is perpetually going to be engaged in this dukkhalam. All the bird needs to do is turn around, and this entanglement can be resolved. So when we try to compare the Prakriti and the Purusha, we realize that both are eternal, both are uncreated. But the Purusha does not create, is very passive, whereas the Prakriti is very dynamic. Both are absolute and infinite. But the Purusha, neither the cause nor the effect. The cause and effect are the Prakriti. Both are indestructible and impure. So how does this come about? How did the Purusha get entangled in the Prakriti? What is the starting point? How did this soul get trapped in the body? And this has been very nicely described as the Purusha being unmanifested, formless, beyond the attributes, beyond cause and effect, space and time, and is pure existence. But the Prakriti is the creative force of action, the source of form, manifestation, attributes, and nature. So from time immemorial, both of them are interconnected. Purusha, Prakriti are eternal. They are interlinked ever since the creation of the universe. And they are linked together because of the control of the Buddhi, the cosmic intelligence of Buddhi, which is being controlled by ahamkar, the ego, sense of I am. And with this ahamkar being so predominant, it allows itself to be enslaved by the sattva, the rajas, and tamas. Sattva is stability, pure aspect, awakening, essence, and light. Rajasic is dynamic movement. Tamas is static, potential energy, inertial darkness. So when the modes of material nature manifest and control or are controlled by the ego, ahamkar, that Purusha and Prakriti remain intertwined. And this has been going on ever since the creation of the universe, because both of them are beginningless. The Supreme Lord is the Supreme Purusha, the master, the controller, the enjoyer, proprietor, and maintainer of the entire cosmos. The Jiva is the energy of the Supreme Lord, and is not the master and controller, but is still called Purusha due to his mentality of being the master. Thus, the word Purusha is used to refer both supreme as well as the living entity. So what are the roles of Prakriti and Purusha? Nature is the cause of all material activities and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of various sufferings and enjoyments in the world. So Prakriti, or the material energy, is the cause of all material cause and effects. Whatever happens, there is a cause. Why did the seed grow into a plant? There is a cause. And that cause is material. Why did the rain come? There is a cause. That cause is material. Everything that happens as a cause is material. But the Purusha is not the cause and does not have effect, but is the cause of the own happiness and distress due to his enjoying propensity. So it's very interesting to see how Prakriti and Purusha are intertwined, how they impact one another, and how the Supreme Lord is so kind upon the living entity that he always accompanies the individual soul in all circumstances and is present as the Supreme Soul or Paramatma. Now, I'd like to just stop here because moving forward is going to be very exciting, and I want to hold your attention because I'm going to connect this with the next topic. where we talk about the modes of material nature in more detail and how the Purusha association with the modes of material nature has caused this entanglement. So this evening, we had the prelude on this whole last 6 topics. We were introduced to the field of activities, Kshetra, the knower of the field of activities, Kshetragya, which are of 2 types, the soul, knower of the individual body, and the super soul, knower and proprietor of all bodies. Then we talked about what is this process of acquiring knowledge. We talked about many, many different characteristics that one needs to have. And then we had a brief glimpse on this object of knowledge. Who is the Lord? How can we describe him? What is he? How powerful is he? So once we have learned about Jnanam and Jnayam, we then understood that the whole world, creation came from the Lord, and that creation is the material and the spiritual. And we just heard how both the matter, the spirit and matter, the Purusha and Prakriti have been intertwined with one another since time immemorial. And that's because of the Ahamkar, under the controls of modes of material nature. So how to and what we need to do to escape from these clutches of birth, death, disease, and old age. How to do that will require a deeper understanding of the modes of material nature and the reason why this is so difficult to disentangle. So I take leave now. It is 8:40. Thank you so much for paying attention. Look forward to having you next week to enjoy this session. If there are any questions or comments, I'm very happy to take them. No questions? Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening. I'll see you again next week. Jai Sri Krishna. Jai Gurudev.